Late one evening in Galilee, the history books don't record the exact date, but the atmosphere described in the forbidden texts is palpable. Jesus sat with his inner circle, Peter, John, and Mary Magdalene, reading directly from the Torah. They had just finished a passage in Exodus, a heavy, terrifying passage where the deity commanded the Israelites to slaughter entire cities, men, women, children, livestock. Leave nothing breathing. Peter looked up, visibly disturbed. He asked the question that had been haunting humanity for centuries, a question that perhaps you have asked yourself in the quiet of the night. He said, "Master, why is the God of our fathers so violent, so jealous, so angry? You teach us about a Father of infinite love, but this," he gestured at the scroll, "this doesn't feel like love. This feels like rage." Jesus closed the scroll slowly. He looked at each of them, and he said something that would eventually get him killed. Something that the organized church would spend the next 2,000 years trying to erase, burn, and bury. He told them, that is not the Father. The entity you are reading about, the one who demands blood sacrifices, who drowns the world in floods, who commands genocide and calls it holy. He has a name, but it is not God. In the secret traditions, he is called Yaldabaoth, the Demiurge, the chief Archon, and he has been pretending to be the Most High since the beginning of this realm. This is the secret that changes everything. There are specific passages, specific words used in the Bible itself that reveal exactly what this entity is. Not the source of all things, but a ruler of matter, an archon. And when you know his true identity, when you see the evidence written in the holy texts, the entire paradigm shifts. That teaching was systematically removed. When the church compiled the canonical texts in the 4th century, they excluded almost every reference to Jesus exposing Yahweh as the Demiurge. They burned the Gnostic Gospels that preserved this specific conversation. Because if the world knew that the God of the Old Testament, the being we have been taught to fear for millennia, was actually a lesser creator deity, a false god of the material prison, the entire structure of religious control would collapse instantly. No more guilt, no more fear of divine punishment, no more sacrificial salvation. Tonight, we are going to look at the exact evidence Jesus used. We are going to examine the 5 specific proofs written in the Bible that expose the Old Testament God as the Demiurge. Once you see these 5 signatures, you can never unsee them. Before we analyze the evidence, we must establish the definition. This is where most people get lost because they have been conditioned to believe that God is a single, monolithic concept. But in the ancient world, and specifically in the teachings of the Gnostics, there was a critical distinction between the monad and the demiurge. These are not 2 different interpretations of the same God. These are 2 completely different entities operating at opposite frequencies with opposite natures. First, there is the monad. Jesus referred to this as the Father. The monad is the high God, the ineffable source. It is pure consciousness, pure light, and pure emanation. The monad is everything. Therefore, it requires nothing. It does not have human emotions. It does not get angry. It does not experience jealousy because there is nothing outside of itself to be jealous of. The monad creates through emanation. It extends itself to create life, like the sun extends its rays. Then there is the demiurge. In Greek, demiurgos simply means craftsman or public worker. This entity is not the source. He is the architect of the physical, material world. He is the God of this world. Unlike the monad, the demiurge is separate from his creation. He is flawed. He experiences emotional volatility, anger, regret, jealousy, and insecurity. He demands worship because he lacks the internal fullness of the monad. He needs validation. He needs energy. The confusion and the tragedy of Western religion is that for 2,000 years we have conflated these two. We have taken the attributes of the jealous, angry Demiurge and projected them onto the infinite monad. We have been taught to worship the architect of the prison, thinking he is the father of our souls. Jesus came to break this conflation. He never called God by the Old Testament names. If you read the Gospels carefully, he never says Yahweh. He never says Jehovah. He always says Father, Abba. He was deliberately separating the true God from the tribal deity of the Old Testament. When his disciples asked him to teach them to pray, he didn't say, "Pray to the Lord of hosts." He said, "Pray like this, Our Father, who art in heaven." A different entity, a different frequency entirely. Now, let's look at the mechanism. How do we know this isn't just a modern reinterpretation? How do we know this is what the texts actually say? We have to look at the signatures. Just as an artist leaves a signature on a painting, the Demiurge left his psychological signature all over the Old Testament. Here are the 5 undeniable proofs that the Old Testament God is the Demiurge. Proof number 1. His name is jealous. This is found in Exodus chapter 34, verse 14. The text is explicit. It says, "For you shall worship no other God, for the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God." Read that again carefully. It doesn't say he feels jealousy. It says his name is jealous. It is his core identity. We need to analyze this logically. Jealousy is a secondary emotion. It is a reaction rooted in fear, insecurity, and scarcity. You are only jealous when you are afraid of losing something, or when you believe someone else has something you lack. The monad, the infinite source, cannot be jealous. Why? Because the monad is everything. There is no other. There is no competition. Infinite consciousness simply is. But the Demiurge is jealous. Why? Because he knows he is not the Most High. He knows there is a realm above him, the pleroma, the fullness. He knows there are other archons, and he is terrified that if his human subjects discover the true Father, they will stop worshiping him. That is why the very first commandment is not love one another. The first commandment is, "You shall have no other gods before me." That is not the command of a confident creator. That is the mandate of an insecure ruler trying to maintain a monopoly. Jesus saw this insecurity. He recognized that a God who demands exclusive devotion under the threat of death is not the Father of love, but an archon trying to maintain control. Proof number 2. He creates evil. This is perhaps the most damning admission in the scripture, found in Isaiah chapter 45, verse 7. The King James Version translates it directly. "I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things." The Demiurge admits it. He creates evil. Theologians have spent centuries trying to apologize for this verse. They say, "Oh, he creates calamity, not moral evil." But the text uses the word ra in Hebrew, which implies badness, distress, misery, and harm. The monad does not create evil. The monad is pure emanation. Light does not create darkness. Darkness is simply the absence where the light has not reached. But the Demiurge operates in duality. He is the architect of the binary system, good versus evil, light versus dark, us versus them. By confessing that he is the creator of evil, the Old Testament God is revealing his nature as the maintainer of the conflict matrix. He creates the storm so he can be the shelter. He creates the threat so he can be the savior. He maintains a system of opposing forces to keep humanity trapped in a cycle of struggle, judgment, and fear. Jesus taught unity. He taught that the kingdom is within. He did not teach a war between cosmic powers, but a realization of internal peace. The entity creating evil is the entity managing the prison. Proof number 3. He demands blood sacrifices. If you read the book of Leviticus, it reads like a manual for a slaughterhouse. It is not a spiritual text. It is a technical instruction manual on how to kill animals, how to spill their blood, and how to burn their flesh. But here is the disturbing part. Repeatedly, throughout the Torah, the text says, "The smell of the burning flesh is a sweet savor unto the Lord. It is pleasing to him." Why? Why would an infinite spirit, the creator of the universe, need the death of a goat or a lamb to be pleased? Why does he require blood to forgive? This is where the Gnostic understanding of energy harvesting comes in. Archons, entities of the lower astral realms, cannot generate their own divine light. They are cut off from the source. So, to sustain their existence and their power, they feed on the energy of lower beings. They harvest the fear, the pain, and the life force released when a living being dies violently. The sacrificial system was not a mechanism for human morality. It was a mechanism for Archontic sustenance. It was a feeding ritual. You convince the population that God is angry. You tell them the only way to calm his anger is to kill something valuable. The humans release fear and guilt. The animal releases life force and pain. This creates a cocktail of energy that the Demiurge finds pleasing. Jesus came and abolished sacrifice. He quoted the prophets saying, "I desire mercy, not sacrifice." He flipped the tables in the temple, not just because they were selling money, but because they were turning the Father's house into a marketplace of death. He knew the true Father requires nothing. The monad does not eat. The monad does not harvest, it emanates. Proof number 4. He punishes generations. Exodus chapter 20, verse 5. This is part of the 10 Commandments. "For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the 3rd and 4th generation of them that hate me." Generational punishment. If you sin, your children pay. Your grandchildren pay. Your great-grandchildren pay. This violates every standard of cosmic justice and morality. Even in our flawed human legal systems, we do not put a child in prison for the crimes of the father. That is considered barbaric. Yet we are told this is the justice of God? Number. This is the logic of a debt collector. This is a control mechanism designed to create perpetual guilt and perpetual karma. It keeps humanity tied to the system across bloodlines. It creates a fear that you are born into debt, born with a burden you did not create. The Demiurge wants to control the lineage. He wants to ensure that the souls trapped in his realm remain trapped through cycles of inherited obligation. The monad, by contrast, operates on individual sovereignty. Jesus taught that each individual has the spark of God within them. The kingdom of God is within you. It is not something you inherit from your grandfather's behavior. It is inherent in your existence. The idea that you are punished for the sins of your ancestors is a lie designed to keep you disempowered. It is Archontic architecture, not divine law. Proof number 5. He is ignorant of the higher realms. This is the most subtle but perhaps the most profound proof. Throughout the creation myths in Genesis, the Demiurge speaks with absolute arrogance. He says, "I am the Lord, and there is none else. Before me there was no God formed, neither shall there be after me." In the Gnostic text, the hypostasis of the Archons, this moment is described in detail. The text says that when Yaldabaoth shouted, "I am God and there is no other," a voice came from the pleroma above him saying, "You are mistaken, Samael." Samael means the blind God. The Old Testament God is ignorant. He genuinely believes he is the only God because he cannot see beyond the boundaries of the material firmament he created. He is blind to the spiritual realms that existed long before him. He creates the material world and calls it good because he doesn't realize it is a flawed copy of the higher reality. Ignorance is not a divine attribute. Omniscience, all-knowingness, is a divine attribute. The fact that the Old Testament God constantly tests humans to see what they will do, like asking Abraham to kill Isaac, or searching for Adam in the garden, asking, "Where are you?" proves he is not all-knowing. He is a limited entity, playing the role of God, unaware of his own limitations. Jesus, however, came from the pleroma. He came from the realm above the Demiurge. That is why he told the Pharisees in the book of John, "You are of your father the devil." He was a murderer from the beginning. He told them directly, "You do not know the Father because the God you worship is not him." So what happens when you understand this? What is the effect of this knowledge? The moment you accept the possibility that the Old Testament God is the Demiurge, the entire psychological framework of religion changes. First, the cognitive dissonance vanishes. You know that feeling you have always had, that deep, uncomfortable pit in your stomach when you read about God ordering the slaughter of children? That wasn't your lack of faith. That wasn't you being a bad sinner. That was your spirit, your divine spark, recognizing a lot. You felt uncomfortable because you come from the monad. You possess a fragment of the true source. And when that fragment encounters the cruelty of the Demiurge, it recoils. It is a frequency mismatch. The religious authorities told you to ignore that feeling, to submit, to say God's ways are mysterious. But Jesus is telling you to trust that feeling. That recoil is your internal compass working perfectly. Second, the fear of hell and judgment evaporates. The Demiurge rules through fear. He wants you to believe that if you don't worship him, you will be tortured forever. But when you realize he is an imposter, a petty, jealous bureaucrat of the universe, his threats lose their power. You don't fear the angry boss when you realize you don't actually work for him. You realize you are a free agent. Third, you stop legitimizing the suffering of the world. For centuries, people have tried to say that wars, plagues, and genocides are part of God's perfect plan. They are not. They are the mechanics of a flawed system run by a flawed entity. This liberates you from having to defend the indefensible. You can look at the suffering of the world and say, "This is not right. This is not the will of the Father. This is the corruption of the archons." And in that realization, you become a force for true healing, rather than a passive acceptor of evil. If the evidence is this clear, why do billions of people still worship the Demiurge? Why did the church fight so hard to hide this? Because the Demiurge offers something the monad does not: structure and external security. The Demiurge gives you a list of rules. Do this, don't do that. Eat this, don't eat that. Pay this, sacrifice that. It is a transaction. If I obey, I will be safe. For the human ego, that is very comforting. It is easy. You don't have to think, you just have to obey. It appeals to the material state of consciousness that seeks a master. The monad, the true father, offers something much scarier: freedom. Jesus taught that the kingdom is within. That means you are responsible. You don't need a priest. You don't need a temple. You don't need a blood sacrifice. You need to go inward. You need to do the work of remembering who you are. The monad does not command. It awaits your return. The church could not build an empire on the monad. You cannot control people who know they are God. You cannot tax people who know salvation is internal. You cannot threaten people who know that death is just an illusion. To build an empire, you need the Demiurge. You need the jealous, angry God who requires a priesthood to mediate his wrath. That is why the Gnostic texts were burned. That is why the narrative was hijacked. The system protects itself. This knowledge I am sharing with you tonight is not new. It is ancient. It is the gnosis that Jesus attempted to give to the world before it was suppressed. He was not trying to start a new religion. He was trying to organize a prison break. The prison is not a place with bars. The prison is the belief that you are a lowly sinner subject to the whims of an angry, jealous deity. The prison is the belief that you must earn the right to exist through sacrifice and suffering. The key to the cell is the realization that the God of the Old Testament, Yaldabaoth, the chief archon, has no authority over you. You are not his property. You are a spark of the monad, temporarily experiencing this dense material realm. When you read the Bible now, you will see it with new eyes. You will be able to separate the signal from the noise. Every time you read a verse where God is loving, forgiving, and expansive, that is the influence of the monad. Every time you read a verse where God is jealous, violent, tribal, and demanding, that is the voice of the Demiurge. You have the discernment now. You have the code. The angry, jealous God demanding obedience was never God. He was the Demiurge, and Jesus came to expose him. Tonight, you are reclaiming your sovereignty. You are stepping out of the shadow of the Archon and into the light of the true Father. This is the end of fear. This is the beginning of Gnosis. If you have recognized this distinction tonight, if you feel that resonance in your chest that says, finally, this makes sense, then verify it for yourself. Don't take my word for it. Read the texts. Look at the patterns. The truth has been hiding in plain sight for 2,000 years. You are not the servant of a jealous God. You are the offspring of the infinite source. Welcome home.